Patrick.
Hey, Michael J.
Man, what's going on in Modern right now? This is crazy stuff.
You're talking about the big shift as a result of the most recent. I mean, well, it's been kind of a wave growing, right? Like basically ever since Arclight Phoenix was printed, setting off a chain reaction. But at this point, we've got a whole bunch of new tournaments because of the SAG regionals this past weekend, and we're seeing kind of a bunch of second and third level effects of the fallout of some of this stuff. You know, well, like obviously there's Izzet Phoenix all over the place, but there's also like a very different mix of decks for the world of Arclight Phoenix.
Yeah, I'm a little curious, actually. Would Arclight Phoenix, kind of the blue-red Phoenix deck, I think people are widely accepting that to be the best deck in Modern right now, but would that still be the case if they hadn't banned KCI? I don't know. But, this is the world that we're in, where we have a pretty strong front-runner in Izzet Phoenix, but like you said, like massive shifts elsewhere in the metagame. Like, Dredge is strong right now, and like the mix of like the second tier decks is very different than we've seen in some previous months.
Oh, definitely. And well, I mean, partly, I think you actually hit the nail on the head. The banning of KCI has really left a void for that fast combo deck, and that's got to be by far the biggest reason for the recent resurgence of Amulet Titan, right? Like. Obviously, Amulet Titan, ever since losing Bloom, has been a little bit, by the wayside, but recently we're seeing, like, for instance, Austin Robbins finished top 4 with in one of the regionals with a Amulet Bloom deck, but no Blooms, of course, just 4 Azusa Lost But Seeking. So Primeval Titan, Azusa Lost But Seeking, Amulet of Vigor, Lotus Bloom, Hive Mind, Pact of Negation, Summer's Pact, Ancient Stirring, Storm Vision. So it's basically just, we don't have Summer Blooms, so we just play more Azusas and then just round out the deck with just a few more miscellaneous cards, and still has that Hive Mind backup plan for when you're not just Azusa Primeval Titaning. But the primary sequence is still just Primeval Titan with an Amulet of Vigor. So like you put out your Amulet of Vigor, and then that makes it so that your card, your bounce lands like Celestia, Sanctuary, come down and can untap in response to their bounce trigger, letting you net 2 mana. And then if you have something like Azusa, you can just keep playing the same Celestia Sanctuary over and over again, getting 2 mana each time. So great.
Yeah, so let's say I just have an Azusa Lost But Seeking, right? Like, what turn do I want to play this card on? Like turn 3? That seems a little slow to me.
I mean, the primary sequence, like the dream sequence, is just turn 1 Amulet of Vigor, and then turn 2 play a land like Celestia Sanctuary or Simic Growth Chamber, and you're already at 3 mana. Then you play
because I have 3 mana already.
Right, and then you get to have more land drops. And a big thing, though, is without Summer Bloom, you're still targeting, like, in reality, you're going to try to win on turn 3 or 4 most of the time. 3 is a little ambitious. 4 is the real target, like when that Lotus Bloom gets unsuspended. But also, if you just play Azusa and you just go, like, the other thing you can do is you can play multiple Amulet of Vigors, and then you just really start going crazy with mana. Like, if you go turn 1 Amulet of Vigor, turn 2, play a bounce land and an Amulet. Like, before you even play the bounce land, you can play another Amulet of Vigor, and then when you play the bounce land, you'll get 4 mana, and you'll have 1 floating when you play Azusa, and you'll have 2 more land drops, and each one of those land drops will net you 4 more mana. So you'll just have 9 mana, and then you can just drop Primeval Titan, and when you drop Primeval Titan, then you'll immediately be able to search up 2 lands that will then untap, and if you have 2 Amulet of Vigors, you'll get twice from each of them. But the primary sequence at this point is you go get Slayer's Stronghold and a Boros Garrison. So even though your deck is primarily blue-green, you go get the Boros Garrison just so that you can untap the Boros Garrison and untap the Slayer's Stronghold, and then you immediately tap the Boros Garrison to fuel the Slayer's Stronghold, letting you attack with the Primeval Titan, which then, of course, lets you go get 2 more lands, And you can frequently get in spots where you're doing things like go get Vesuva and copy something that you need again, or go get a Sunhold Fortress of Legion, give something double strike so you can go for a big kill. But like at that point, you're just going so hog wild that, and like the other thing you do, the frequent
at this point, right? Like,
and you can convert it into a real thing. You can convert it into a real resource. Like for instance, you go get Teleria, like Teleria West, and a bounce land during your attack phase. Now the bounce land will untap, and Teleria West will untap, but you don't even have to untap the Teleria West. You do, but it doesn't matter because you want to bounce the Teleria West so that you can transmute it to go find that Miser's Pact of Negation so that you can just protect this whole combo you've got down,
Wow, that's filthy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no question this deck is among the filthiest there is. I mean, this deck it does really, really, really big things, big, powerful, busted things. It's got lots of bad cards and a high failure rate, and it's like almost entirely air, but it does so many busted things. And take a look at this sideboard here. I mean, there's 3 Path to Exiles, but everything else is all one-ofs.
Before we go to the sideboard, like in the main deck, you've got that 1 Pact of Negation, but your coverage on the Primeval Titan is not good. That's correct, right? Like you play it, you might get some advantage out of this, but somebody could kill it. And it's not too hard to kill it, and it's pretty hard for you to stop them from killing it despite you being a blue deck, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have that 1 Pact of Negation, and that's the end of the story. But like, you're definitely not all in on protecting the Primeval Titan. You're mostly just trying to get an enormous advantage from your. I mean, first of all, you're just getting an outrageous mana advantage, right? But then you're also doing things like the amount that Teleria West gives you a package of things like you could go get engineered explosives for some amount of interaction on the actual table, and the big thing is Teleria West to go get Summoner's Pact so that you can Summoner's Pact for another Primeval Titan. And remember, you still have that Slayer Stronghold and that Boros Garrison, so it's not like you're not just going to Primeval Titan them again.
That is the coolest combo, because you get that Teleria West and you get like a bounce land. Those are free cards just when you play the Primeval Titan, right? If you've got the Amulet in play already, then they come into play essentially untapped. You tap them for 3. You keep the Karoo of whatever kind that you've got, right? And then you can tutor with the Teleria West.
Well, you can. It depends. Like if you have an Azusa Auspice Seeking, you might want to bounce it a couple times and make yourself a bunch of mana.
Oh, that's hot.
And there's other things you can do too sometimes. Like, for instance, being able to go find Kabira Crossroads, gain 2 life, bounce it, replay it, bounce. That's like an important plan against a burn deck. That 1 Kabira Crossroads in your deck, you don't have any white cards, but you have a Kabira Crossroads.
Exile.
That's true. In the sideboard, you do have Path to Exile. But the ability to Kabira Crossroads multiple times is like a very important way to have a little bit of staying power, because sometimes if you just need some defense, the fastest thing you can do is just Primeval Titan and go get a Colony Garden and a Kabira Crossroads, gaining 2 life and giving you a chump blocker.
It's kind of hot.
And then, obviously, Temple of Mystery gives you a little bit of selection. Like, if you're missing something, the ability to just go find 2 Temple of Mysteries. Like this deck does a lot of tutoring with its lands. 1 Boros Garrison, 1 Crumbling Vestige, 1 Kabira Crossroads, 1 Colony Garden, 1 Slayer Stronghold, 1 Sunhome Fortress of the Legion, 1 Vesuva. And then the sideboard even has 1 Bojuka Bog, 1 Ghost Quarter.
That makes sense to me.
All the lands, of course. You've got all these Teleria West, and Primeval Titans. Of course. Why would you not want to have awesome packages of lands to go get? There's also sweet stuff like, for instance, 1 Tormod's Crypt, which is kind of a dope graveyard hate card when you've got all these ways to tutor up zeros.
Tutoring a 0, easy peasy in this deck. Talk to me about a Hornet Queen, though. I understand we can get this with the Summoner's Pact, but do I want
That's the thing. Definitely. So, like, first of all, there's a little bit of vulnerability to, like, if your opponent hits all your Primeval Titans, like, I mean, if somebody Cranial Extractions, you replace one of the million things like that, what do you think they're going to name? It's definitely
Primeval Titan.
Right. There's so many things that could happen. And plus there's little things like somebody sticks a meddling mage or something, right? But having a backup victory condition that attacks on a different axis, if your opponent just has removal spells and they're like, well, I'll just kill the Titan and that's how I'll just survive. I'm just going to power through. The removal spells are not going to help them against the Hornet Queen. Plus, the Hornet Queen is a much, much more compelling defensive option against certain mid-range fair strategies. If you're playing against a white aggro deck, if you get Hornet Queen, you're just like complete. Like you're playing as humans, and they've got all these meddling mages and stuff, right? And if you just Hornet Queen, you just completely take over the board.
Well, it does cost 7, but you're basically trading with 5 cards, right? That's the thing.
Yeah. And that's all there is to it. I mean, Elish Norn is a better backup victory condition, but you can't go get it the same way.
Oh, I mean, Elish Norn is very powerful. I mean, how do you even get that out in this deck? Do you have to?
How do you get it out? Nah, no. That's why there's 4 Celestia Sanctuaries, the aforementioned Kabira Crossroads, a Crumbling Vestige, Boros Garrison, Aether Hub, Gemstone Mine. Plus, besides, it's actually really easy because if you just have a single Amulet of Vigor, like you're already there.
Everything
you can just
makes double.
You can just
single way.
Exactly. Like you could just tap your Celestia Sanctuary, play a Simic Growth Chamber, bounce the Celestia Sanctuary. I mean, I guess you need the Azusa, but the point being that like there's just a lot of ways to do it, and you can use one. There's spots where you can use one land to get both, and you've got tons of selection anyway with like Ancient Stirrings and Serum Visions and so on.
Wow, this deck is like shaking my head. It's got a lot of stuff going on. It's clearly super powerful. Like, the profile of player who's playing this, like, why would you want to play this versus not playing Valakut or vice versa?
Well, I mean, this is a faster deck to be sure. I mean, the Valakut deck is set multiple turns slower. The Valakut deck is, like, very robust and powers through interaction. Like, if your opponent's playing a fair strategy, you can just go like straight through them. Like, how like Tron just goes through a lot of fair strategies?
Oh, yeah. Because Tron just is very powerful, and a lot of its stuff resists interaction.
Right. And the Valakut deck is a lot more resistant to interaction. This deck is extremely vulnerable to interaction.
Like, Thoughtseize is great against this deck?
Thoughtseize is great against this deck, although, notably, there is some amusing situations where sometimes Thoughtseize doesn't really matter because this deck sometimes it'll just have all land. And so then you can just keep going because you can like play the Teleria West from your hand. You can like play a Simic Growth Chamber from your hand, bounce your Teleria West, pitch the Teleria West to go get a Summoner's Pact, go get Primeval Titan. So like this deck, the real thing is about its mana. Going after its hand is still good, but if this deck has a critical mass of lands of mana on the table and Amulet of Vigor, the big thing is Amulet of Vigor. I mean, the most powerful card in this deck by far, the whole deck is warped around Primeval Titan. But the difference between when this deck draws Amulet of Vigor or not is just night and day. It's like when you were playing against the black decks from, back in the day, the difference between when they have Dark Ritual or not. It's just, you're playing a different game when this deck has Amulet of Vigor.
Is Cindervines great against this deck? It seems like it would be okay at least. No?
It's okay. No, it's fine. It's fine. It is okay at least. If you have it, yeah, it's fine. You're at a disadvantage, right? Like, so first of all, this deck will frequently, when it kills you on turn 3 or 4, it will have only played a handful of non-creature spells. Like, yeah, I mean, you probably play, like, if you put the Cindervines down on turn 2, it's possible that you're only going to play like 1 or 2 more spells the rest of the game. But like also spending 3 mana to destroy an Amulet of Vigor is a tough way to do it. And that's like the only target in the deck besides like Lotus Bloom and Hivemind. And Hivemind's a great one to destroy, to be sure, but it's not always like that's not their A plan anyway.
It's not the easiest, right?
Right.
Well, even if you have it in play when they have Hivemind, like I guess they have to pass priority in a situation where you can actually do it, right?
Well, and you got to remember also that a lot of the value of Cindervines is that damage accruing, and it just doesn't really work that well in a deck that has the ability and they have the ability, first of all, they're too fast, but second, they have the ability to start looping Kabira Crossroads. They really can just gain life faster than you could damage them with Cindervines. Because remember, each of their lands doesn't trigger the Cindervines, and each time they transmute doesn't trigger Cindervines, and each time they play Primeval Titan or Azusa doesn't trigger Cindervines. It's just they're surprisingly resilient. And remember, the Ancient Stirrings and Serum Visions are frequently finding cards that also don't trigger Cindervines, so you're only getting you only get taxed once versus like how normally cantrip decks get hit by Cindervines like a lot.
Wow.
Summoner's Pact too, for that matter.
Is this like the deck to play then? I mean, it seems real solid. Like, well, this is one of the powerful.
Oh, it's definitely powerful.
Overwhelmingly strong.
It's extremely powerful. It's definitely a min-max sort of thing. It's power. Like, it is in the running for among the most broken of decks. The reason you play it is because you believe that it's worth being so vulnerable to be so broken. This deck, more so than most, is extremely vulnerable to if you tune your deck to be better against this deck, you can get meaningful percentage points from each little thing, because this deck, part of it, one of its greatest strengths is also one of its greatest weaknesses, and that's the amount that this deck is so singularly focused. This deck plays out the same way. It's, for how fast it is, it's crazy how much this deck just plays the same sequence of cards. It's a convoluted series of cards that each have vulnerable pressure points, and it plays them out in the same script over and over again, and it actually stops through 10 different points on the script every time, and if you disrupt any of those points, you can do some things. It doesn't make you win, but you can gain some percentage that you can then leverage for some other reason. So this is a deck with an unusually large number of weak spots. If you hit them at the exact right time, if you know the exact right ways, like for instance, if you're playing against this deck and you're playing with Inquisition of Kozilek instead of Thoughtseize, it's going to cost you a lot. Like a lot. Like the difference between Thoughtseize and it doesn't mean you should just stop playing Inquisition, but if you're just wanting to, if you ever were just sick of losing to Amulet Titan, a slant towards Thoughtseize would help you, because Primeval Titan, and to a lesser degree Hive Mind, but Primeval Titan is so big of what's going on here. And then another one is, you mentioned Cindervines, but the thing I think is actually more effective, Ancient Grudge is actually fantastic against Amulet Titan. Not only is Ancient Grudge 1 mana cheaper to destroy an Amulet of Vigor, and a better surprise against somebody who's trying to leverage a Lotus Bloom coming off suspend. Ancient Grudge, after it destroys that early Amulet of Vigor, sits in play disrupting them. You see, this deck is all about go for the fast kill, and if you react to it, then it needs to just accumulate lots of resources to be able to do things. And the more that you can just trade off resources with a profit. And so, like, it's not that if you destroy the first Amulet of Vigor, it gives up on Amulet of Vigor. It just starts digging harder with its Ancient Stirrings and Serum Vision to go find Amulet of Vigor.
It's like
this deck.
It's like the Belcher deck, right? Like, you can disrupt the Belcher deck, but their next 6 cards will kill you, but they need to get to those 6 cards right first before they can try to do it again.
Right, and if you Ancient Grudge to both slow them down and buy yourself time, and then also just have a 1 mana whammy that you can play at instant speed to solve the next problem that they spend several turns accumulating, it's outrageously good. It's just it's a good way to interact with these people. And then other things include just, it sounds silly, but just little things like Fulminator Mage. Fulminator Mage is a big deal. Why Fulminator Mage instead of just like Molten Rain? Molten Rain, still good, Not nearly as good, however. Sometimes the damage is enough to tip the scales. But like in general, Fulminator Mage's ability to be played for 0 mana and instant speed lets you respond to a bounce land trigger and respond to the Amulet of Vigor. So like they would play their land, and then they're going to untap it immediately, but you can actually destroy it before they even get to untap it.
Oh.
That extra speed is so big, and they still have to bounce one of their other lands.
Oh, that's like it's like you jilted them for lands.
Yeah, exactly. You get more. There's lots of little things. Every single card in this deck, and they have to go through so many, because very frequently when this deck tries to win, it'll have it. It's like just the script is so regularly sit in play with a vulnerable artifact like either Lotus Bloom or Amulet of Vigor. So it always just has this vulnerable artifact for a turn or two before they try to win, in general, if they're going to try to win fast. And then when they try to actually win fast, they have 11 or more tutors to go find Primeval Titan over and over again. They rely on Azusa even more so now that they don't have Summer Bloom, and Azusa dies to everything. And if you they have to do the Azusa and Primeval Titan and Amulet of Vigor, and then when they Primeval Titan, they go get a bunch of lands over and over again that are the same lands, like Boros Garrison and the Slayer Stronghold, and the Slayer Stronghold is going to target the Primeval Titan. Like they have so many sequences that they do very, very, very repetitively. And for instance, if you had that Fulminator Mage in play, you could actually destroy the Stronghold before they can ever activate it. There's a lot of things you could do. Now you have to. It's not as easy as it might sound though, because they have a lot of things they can do. It's just that you have a ton of plays that each buy you multiple turns, and if you this is a great matchup for just practicing against somebody who knows what they're doing, and this is an important matchup for not just like there's this common playtesting sort of trap, this pitfall that people fall into, where they'll have two decks. They like one of the decks and they don't like the other deck, and their friend likes the same deck they do and doesn't like the other deck, and the two of them both want to play whatever their pet deck is and don't want to play the enemy, and so they'll go through the motions and they'll try to just prepare. And for some decks, like if you're playing against Jund, if you're playing against, there's a lot of decks that if you play against, it doesn't take a ton to get you to at least an operating threshold, right? But the Amulet Titan deck is very non-intuitive and very nuanced and requires a lot of understanding and familiarity with it for most people. So like you got to make sure you're trying your darndest to actually win with the Titan deck, because it is one of those decks that is so easy to make lose if you kind of just don't want it to win.
So speaking of making it lose, I think I might be missing something other than one Reclamation Sage in the sideboard, but this deck is unusually vulnerable to Blood Moon, right? Like, I mean, people have Blood Moons already for Tron and some of the other specialty land decks in Modern, but this deck seems like pretty, like none of its stuff works.
Actually, you might be surprised. There's a reason this deck has 2 forests. If you're playing against a Blood Moon deck, as long as you get the forests, it's not great. It's not like you're happy, right? Because like not having Slayer Stronghold and Sunhome Fortress it's all meaningful. But like if your opponent just has a Blood Moon and they don't have another game going on, you can still just play Primeval Titans and just have 6/6s.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like of course that's not what you want, right? Like that's not the win case. But like you can play Summoner's Pact for 0, and then you go find Reclamation Sage and destroy the Blood Moon and can pay. And you can just play Primeval Titans, and sometimes 6/6s are really good.
I mean, 6/6s that draw 4 cards are pretty good.
And this part's the tricky part. If you have if you have Lotus Bloom or whatever, you can still engineer explosives away Blood Moon.
You need Oh, I guess you get red from the mountains, green from the forest, and then you get anything from the Lotus Bloom, right? Okay.
Well, yeah, any of the other right, and it's obviously that's a big parlay. It's not like that's a great plan. Definitely Blood Moon messes this deck up something fierce.
Well,
there's no question.
Its fancy stuff is turned off, at least until you've got that Engineered Explosives or that Summoner's Pact for Reclamation Sage.
Blood Moon slows this deck down monstrously, but if you're playing with pressure, it's great. There are some people who will just Blood Moon, and now we're just both sitting here because they're playing some sort of a corny mono-red deck or something where they're just like, my plan is that in a couple turns, my Chandra will take over the game. And it's like, well, that's not a super fast plan. As long as you're like putting some pressure on this deck, the Blood Moon is just devastating. Or if you just have like a little, counterspell mana open or whatever.
What about
speaking of which, man,
hammer?
Koth's a pretty fast clock. Dude, how sick is it going to be if they reprint Counterspell?
You think they're reprinting in the new Modern?
In Modern Horizons?
Yeah.
God, how filthy is it going to be when they put Counterspell in that set, man?
I don't even know. You think it's going to just massively change the world? Counterspell and Jace Sculptor together again?
Well, I don't think. I mean, the Jace part's fine. It's like there's a lot of other things. I don't think Counterspell. It's a blue card, sure, but I just mean that for instance, Teferi and Counterspell is like a pretty natural pairing, right?
Oh, I mean, I don't think that there's a better one that I can think of. How would you compare that Amulet Titan deck that we've been talking about to like Chihoy Yims from Atlanta? He came in second place in Atlanta.
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest difference here is just the creature package, right?
Yeah, I mean, Chihoy Yims still has 4 Azuzas and 4 Primeval Titans, but he's got Sakura Tribe Scout, which is, a land war elf that kind of only works if you've got extra lands, but is
sort of synergy. It's much more of a poor man's Azusa, right? Like you can just go turn 1 Sakura Tribe Scout, and now it's next turn you'll have half of an Azusa to go, right? Like you'll have the ability to play 1 extra land.
Well, I was always thinking about that card kind of in combination with Selesnya Sanctuary or Simic Growth Chamber, right? The ability to play any extra lands, especially coming from turn 1, the way this card does, I think really blunts the negative impacts of Karuz.
Definitely.
And if you get a fast Trinket Mage, I guess Trinket Mage is there to go get Amulet of Vigor?
Definitely. And this is pretty sweet. Once you have the Trinket Mage package, I think it's pretty awesome having 1 Walking Ballista, because it's your 3 Teleria Wests can go find it, your 2 Trinket Mages can find it, and plus it's another thing you can go get. Your Ancient Stirrings dig to it, but the ability to Walking Ballista as a catch-all backup plan, because just sometimes you make gross amounts of mana and it's something you can do that you can tutor up with lots of things. Somebody plays a Blood Moon, you can just Walking Ballista, right? That's a plan. At least you have a thing.
Oh, that's a pretty good thing too, right? I mean, people who are playing Blood Moon might not be able to deal with a 4/4 very well.
Something I do want to note on the Sakura Tribe Scout that I think a lot of people miss that's a big advantage that it has compared to Azusa. And Azusa is a much better card in general. But Sakura Tribe Scout has this really cool interaction in this deck where if you just have let's say you're in a match against Jund or something, right? Post sideboard. You can have Sakura Tribe Scout sitting in play. If you don't have any gas, one thing you can do is you can thwart somebody's land destruction spell by playing a Simic Growth Chamber or a Selesnya Sanctuary at instant speed. Sakura Tribe Scout lets you play a land from your hand even if it's not your turn. And then you can put the bounce effect on the stack and bounce whatever they were going to destroy with their land destruction spell.
That's super cool.
It's just little things like that. There's just a lot of play to this deck.
What do you think about the Creeping Corrosion and Chihoy Yim sideboard? This seems a little... this deck has a lot of artifacts.
Yeah, but the spots where you bring in Creeping Corrosion, if you're playing against Affinity, it's fine. It's fine.
It's going to hurt them way more than it hurts you.
Definitely. And Affinity is one of the aggro decks that's just so fast that they can actually really race you. You need to have something for Affinity. They're just so fast. If you don't defend yourself... Affinity is very good at beating up on people who don't defend themselves.
Yeah, I think that Affinity is another good example of the metagame shift. If you jump over to, like, let's say the Chicago regionals, there were 2 copies of Affinity in that top 8, and a copy of Hardened Scales, and a copy of War Prison. So these are all artifact-based decks, and I mean, War Prison is this like a new archetype, or is this kind of new?
No, it's been around. I mean, yeah, this variant has been popping up off and on ever since, like, the big lantern sort of fad. This variant has been coming, it's been coming up every so often. It cycles through the metagame. It takes a very specific read from the pilot, but no, I mean, this isn't really a new thing. It's just another of the countless eccentricities.
Bottled Cloister and Snaring Bridge is a dangerous but potentially unbeatable combo.
It's an oldie but a goodie.
Yeah, it's solid.
Yes.
Yeah, that looks. And if you were playing in Chicago last weekend, that whole Ancient Grudge that you had, Patrick, would have served you well in that top 8.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Hardened Scales and is basically an affinity deck, right? Like, it's a meaningfully different archetype, but they both have Arcbound Ravager. And at a certain point, when you're both Arcbound Ravager decks, you're definitely coming from the same family. And then War Prison is definitely, it's like every other Lantern deck. It's just such a, more than half its cards are artifacts. And besides, even just the amount that stuff like Ad Nauseam, where you're short on ways to interact with them in general, you can put it to use. They have 4 Pentad Prisms and 4 Lotus Blooms. I mean, what do the rest of your cards do? You know what I mean? It's not like any of your other cards do anything.
So War Prison, do they literally just win by recycling Pyrite Spellbomb with Academy Ruins?
I mean, they actually win with submission. They win by Academy Ruinsing something over and over and over and over again. But their faster kills are Ipnu Rivulet being recycled with Crucible of Worlds, or the Pyrite Spellbomb Recursion. It's not pretty. But you do actually start killing them kind of fast, right? Because if you're controlling the top of their deck and you've got Ipnu Rivulet is kind of actually a very satisfying way to mill them, right?
So I think I would kind of prefer the sideboard games where Gearper, Aether Grid, and Psymaster Thopterist and the Tezzeret Twins might be speeding the clock up a little bit.
You always prefer the sideboard in the victory conditions plan.
Yeah, because this main deck seems miserable to me.
It is miserable.
It
is miserable.
Super sad. Especially if they go get Witchbane Orb. None of my spells do anything. Whether I'm a burn guy, whether I'm a discard guy, whether I'm just trying to play a fair game of Magic the Gathering that involves casting a Gifts Ungiven with you.
You want to know a miserable card? Possessed Portal. That is a miserable card.
Oh, wow. So this thing is 8 mana?
Yes. If a player, it's 8 mana artifact. If a player would draw a card, that player skips that draw instead. So step 1, from now on, nobody draws cards, right? Go on, tell me more. At the end of each turn, each player sacrifices a permanent. And so it's on my turn, we both sacrifice a permanent. And on your turn, we both sacrifice a permanent. So at the end of each turn, each player sacrifices a permanent unless he or she discards a card from his or her hand. This is a card that is not fun. And you go get it with War of Invention. You're not really paying 8. Just spoiler, you're not really paying 8 in your 21 land deck. You're tapping all your zeros and ones and everything you got laying around.
So the theory here is that you have way more material in play. You kind of drag both of you down into an unfun position, and then you sacrifice the Possessed Portal, right?
Right. Yeah, what you do is, in particular, you're playing as somebody who has no threats anymore in play or whatever. They're not like a threat-heavy deck, right? You're playing against you're playing against a deck that's low threats. You get to a spot where you drop Possessed Portal, they don't get to draw any more cards. So, like, you can just as long as you can keep feeding the portal, if they don't have any way to draw cards now, they're done. Because you can just keep making them, like, you can just eat all of their land and all of the cards in their hand so that they have literally nothing. And if you have something like, for instance, Crucible of Worlds letting you replay things, or for instance, Bottled Cloister. Remember, Bottled Cloister, at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, remove your hand from the game face down. And at the beginning of your upkeep, return all cards removed from the game, from the cloister to your hand. Return all the cards and then draw a card. So you don't get to draw any cards here, but you can hide stuff. But, like, it doesn't matter. The point being that if you're just able to get ahead with if you're just ahead on board, you can attrition yourselves both down and then eventually let it go away. And it's not like you can't get it back anyway. You've got, like, Academy Ruins.
Yeah. I mean, but I feel like getting out of the Possessed Portal the first time would feel like an accomplishment to me, and I would never want to see it again. This is indeed a miserable card.
No. Academy Ruins, like, you're going to deck them.
Oh. Yeah.
Like, they don't have anything left. So, like, you can just, I mean, if you wanted, you could just be like, let them draw one card and then play the Possessed Portal again.
Oh, I guess you could just loop that over and over.
Right, that's what I mean. And then you're going to deck them with it's a bad way to go. That is not a good way to win.
Oh, my God. When you said
but it is submission, inevitable. I told you, that's really what happened.
That, right? Oh, my goodness.
No, it's a lot. Well, you can. Because the one card that you draw could be like Guerrilla Tactics. You know what I mean? Like,
not a modern right now.
Yeah. In Time Spiral.
All right. Well.
Yeah, Guerrilla Tactics. Dude, I would have thought you, of all people, would be up on Guerrilla Tactics.
I am physically ill thinking about this deck. I did not realize the level of inhumanity that someone would have in playing this deck. I thought it was just a cute deck that had Ensnaring Bridge and Witchbane Orb. I can turn off all the different kinds of offenses. Hope they don't have a Teferi in play. Yeah, this is horrible. I guess you have Spellskites too. Like, you had Spellskite against Teferi. Like, if those guys were in play together, yeah, Possessed Portal, turn it on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very telling. Like, Lantern was already, like, such a miserable deck. And if you find a deck that's so miserable that you don't even need the Lanterns anymore, you can just, like, have more egregious of locking components. I think out of all of the cards in Magic, Possessed Portal has got to be at the absolute end of the spectrum with regards to making somebody miserable, right?
I've never played against this card. I didn't realize this card existed. I heartily agree with you. It's like there's not even any way to get ahead with Possessed Portal. It's just like we're both dying. I had a little more fat on my body first. I'm going to watch you waste away, and then I'm going to push your desiccated flesh into the sea.
Yeah, it's definitely a card for people who like to watch desiccated flesh. So in happier news, there are other archetypes showing up, like, for instance, Grixis Control. Dude, Grixis Control. It makes me so happy to see Cruel Ultimatum on the list, man. Philip Silberman top-aided the same Chicago with two copies of Cruel Ultimatum main deck in Grixis. What do you think?
Well, I also like a Cruel Ultimatum. It does warm my heart whenever I see a Cruel Ultimatum in Modern because it's so infrequent. We see like 4 Snapcaster Mages here, 1 Tassiger, 1 Jace. How do you feel about 1 Jace?
I would play more than 1 Jace.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like having one Jace but two Cruel Ultimatums is like it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me.
If I were gonna divide them and I had to play with one or more of both, I would play with two Jace and one Cruel. If I have to play two of one and one of the other.
And you were the first great lover of Cruel Ultimatum, I recall. Like you were really like this card is quite good.
That card, everybody was sleeping on that card. I don't know how good it is in Modern, but I would love if it was good. That would be a delight.
Have you ever lost a tournament game when you cast Cruel Ultimatum?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Lots.
I once lost a tournament game playing for a Nationals invite, having cast all three of my Cruel Ultimatums. That is not an easy task.
Yeah, Cruel Ultimatum is as far as 7-cost spells go, it is very good at letting the other person still beat you some of the time. Just because it's outrageously powerful, but the power is so diffuse. Like, it's spread out on so many axes, and they might not matter.
Yeah.
But I think Cruel Ultimatum is that. I mean, what more do you want?
So this is like the definition of a deck that can compete with almost any other kind of opponent, right? Like, between, like, Nihil Spell Bombs and counter spells and Cruel Ultimatum, and it's like the mix of discard and removal is, I mean, you've got something for everyone. You've got a little Fatal Push, you've got a little Lightning Bolt, you've got a little Dreadbore. I don't know about one each of Inquisition of Kozilek, one Thoughtseize. What do you think about that one? I don't know. It's a little diffuse for me. So
if I was going to play, I don't think it's inherently bad. In terms of, like, it's not like if you play Thoughtseizes and Inquisitions, you should play a ton. That said, I don't like playing any discard spells in these decks, in the main deck.
No.
In the main deck. Yeah, I don't like playing any. I mean, it's okay. You can. I just, right now, I'm kind of at a spot. Sometimes you want to go that route, but I think that if you're not playing, like, lots of Tasigur, Gurmag Angler types, if you're trying to, like, sit around and eventually set up, like, you're trying to play a more controlling version, I don't know. I'd rather just play the permission. But I think if you were going to only play 2 discard spells, I don't think it's inherently just the worst to play 1 Inquisition and 1 Thoughtseize. I know, like, Hori frequently played 3 discard spells. I wouldn't let that bother you. I think that there is also some diminishing return stuff going on. The only thing that makes me sad is it doesn't have 1 duress in the sideboard. I used to always love that. Like, just, like, it would just drive people nuts playing, like, like, why does your sideboard have 3 Thoughtseizes and 1 duress? Because, like, sometimes I want to board in duress and not Thoughtseize.
That makes perfect sense to me, right? Like, you don't necessarily want to bring in Thoughtseize against aggressive decks, but duress might be great.
The first duress you draw against a burn deck is so much better than the first Thoughtseize.
Yeah.
And I would still board in Thoughtseize against burn sometimes. It's a tough way to do it. But, like,
it's certainly not always wrong, but it's certainly not always comfortable.
Correct. It's very not always comfortable.
So what about Nihil Spellbomb? How does this work against, like, Dredge? Like, against Crippling Chill, for example? Is there a moment where you can Nihil Spellbomb somebody where you can get their Crippling Chill?
I mean, how much are you, like, you can't really get them with Crippling Chill, right? Like, it's not the same way, right?
Well, so Crippling Chill reads, when Crippling Chill is put into your graveyard from your library, right? So it goes on, there's a trigger, right?
Yeah.
You may exile it. You putting that on the stack, can you get them? Like,
well, of course the 1, but that's not really getting them. I mean, how much are you getting them? You're saying get them, like, stop one of the Crippling Chills?
Yeah. I mean, you're drawing a card. That's all right. That's good times.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're stopping, like, you're fizzling the effect, but that's not really, I mean, it's fine. I think the bigger thing with Nihil Spellbomb is it's a one-sided Tormod script thing. You know, because you're not always gonna just have the mana open, and you're gonna really want to draw that card if you can. But Nihil Spellbomb is robust enough of a card. Like, you can play it against, like, a somebody with Snapcaster Mage and actually be playing the right kind of game, right? Because you don't want to Tormod script somebody with Snapcaster Mage because you're already sort of conceding. You're letting them just get you 2 for 1 anyway, right? Whereas if you play Nihil Spellbomb, you're actually beating them at their own game. And, I mean, it has interactions against Dredge, and obviously you just need a bunch of that stuff sometimes if you're going to try to power through them. I still think that the better way to fight Dredge is just play a fast combo deck.
Yeah, I think that the thing about Modern right now is a little weird, is that there are all these different decks that are performing are all way different from each other, right? Like Grixis Control is way different from Amulet Titan, which is way different from Izzet Phoenix, which is way different from Affinity, which is way different from the other Affinity deck. Like the same kinds of cards aren't good against any of these decks.
You wanna know another deck that's a little bit different? Dude, what about Jordan Dale's As Foretold deck down in Colombia? Like in what is it, like the regionals for Colombia, the U.S. Colombia, but Colombia, like the As Foretold deck is it cycling deck with 4 Curator of Mysteries, 4 Desert Ceradon, 4 Striped Riverwinder, and you're like, okay, that's kind of weird. Why does he just have 12 cycling cards? And actually a little bit more with stuff like Archfiend of Ifnir and Nimble Obstructionist. But that's because this deck has 4 living ends.
So this is a living end deck where you might actually want some of the creatures.
Right, and this is also an Ancestral Visions deck because this deck is an Electro Dominance As Foretold deck. And you can use As Foretold to just let you play Living End or Ancestral Vision for free. And you can use Electro Dominance to let you just play Ancestral Vision or Living End for free. So, for instance, a common sequence might be turn 1, I'm going to just cycle my Striped Riverwinder. Turn 2, I'm going to just cycle Curator of Mysteries and Desert Ceradon. And the next thing, on turn 3, you just play As Foretold and immediately Living End, and you have a huge board. Or you might just go Electro Dominance and Living End on just out of nowhere, because remember, it lets you play it as an instant. And sometimes you just Ancestral Vision just to have some other way to get value, and you have Teleria West. I mean, part of it is Teleria West lets you go find Living End or Ancestral Vision.
It's particularly cool to have Electro Dominance for Ancestral Vision, or As Foretold or whatever, any kind of Ancestral Vision action in a deck like this, where you might actually want the cards, right? Like a lot of the Living End decks, the guys are really garbagey. But like Striped Riverwinder in play is a 5/5 hexproof. That's not bad, right? And
Curator of Mysteries is no joke either.
Very decent Magic card.
You can just cast that one.
Archfiend of Ifnir, it seems awesome in this deck, right? Like with all the other things that allow you to discard cards.
Yeah, because it's not just cycling that lets you do the -1/-1 counters. Like if you just Izzet Charm, you're going to -2/-2 their board.
Yeah, I think this deck is really, really novel. And then the other thing about Living End, I don't know if everybody forgets this. Like I don't know if I would, characterize it correctly as forgetting it, but it's not just I get a bunch of free guys. It's Wrath You, I get a bunch of free guys.
Right, and this is also a deck with a little bit of graveyard haste, so you might not get back cards from your graveyard. Like, for instance, the one Chalice of the one Tormod's Crypt in this deck can be found with Teleria West, and if you just play Tormod's Crypt, they're getting back nothing, even if they have like a sack outlet. And then obviously Fairy Macabre is kind of a random one-off, but like the ability to have Fairy Macabre as a form of disruption, or to counter a key Snapcaster, or to just make it so that your Living End is more asymmetric.
Yep.
And then, so as if that wasn't enough, this is also a Chalice of the Void deck. If you'll notice, there's nothing in this deck that costs 1. All your 1-mana plays are Suspend Ancestral Visions or cycle all these different cards.
But isn't that kind of great? Right?
Yeah.
There's nothing that costs 1, but you have the same kind of 1 casting cost action as somebody playing with cards like Opt. Like, that's really cool.
Right. You're actually able to keep using your mana efficiently, but if you drop a Chalice of the Void on some people, you're going to really mess them up.
You know what the coolest...
Plus, as if that wasn't enough, this deck is a Cryptic Command deck.
That's what I was going to say. The coolest thing about this deck is it plausibly can just Cryptic Command you. Like when you were saying like you could just cast Curator of Mysteries, you were not kidding.
Dude, I do not believe in Bottle Gnomes, though. There's just no way that Bottle Gnomes is the best sideboard card here. I don't believe it.
Well, I mean, you can cast it. I mean, how did you get it in the graveyard without casting it first?
I think you're just casting and gaining life, and then you're like, oh, it's really sweet because when I living end, each time I'll gain 3 more life.
Like, Bottle Gnomes didn't even beat Mono Red in Standard 10 plus years ago. I don't think that it's going to beat Mono Red in Modern.
At least he's got Dragon's Claws in here.
Dragon's Claws, on the other hand, now that is a Mono Red hating card.
This deck is dope though. This is like a really, really, really sweet deck. This is like a really sweet 5 decks shuffled together.
Well, I think it actually has a lot, like a really reminiscent of like a blue Drago-ish deck, right? Especially with the Bottle Gnomes. You can just take that line.
Drago. This deck is a Drago deck because it has 3 Izzet Charms and 3 Cryptic Commands.
Well, I played Bottle Gnomes and Drago back in the day.
I think this is a living end deck more than anything else. But like, it's definitely a weirdo. I can't help but wonder, like, what if we just got one more thing in here? Can we just get Blood Moons somewhere?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Why not?
You know what you could play is the Empyrean, maybe Platinum Empyrean combo.
Oh, get that in there too?
Yeah, so let me look here. What artifacts do we have? There's just Chalice of the Void and Tormod's Crypt, so maybe you could artifact it up.
If you sideboard out those two, board in the Imperium?
Yeah.
That's kind of sick. That's not a bad idea.
Combo. You could fit it.
That's fun.
That's like 6 cards.
Sweet. Don't play Bottle Gnomes if you're going to do that plan, though.
Can you imagine how much life?
I've made a terrible mistake.
People always sleep on that combo, like, because it's often played in like Kiki decks or other, blue-red decks. They're just like you're angling for their Vendilion click aspect of their deck, and then they're like, Empyrean. Dude,
here's a deck after your own heart. I know this one speaks to you, maybe or at least spoke to the old you. Danilo Prito's mono white martyr deck. And this is the one over from the regionals in Orlando. But this actually won the regionals in Orlando with mono white martyr deck. 4 Martyr of Sands, 4 Sarah Ascendant, 3 Thraven Inspector, 4 Squadron Hawk, 4 Ranger of Eos, and then 1 Gideon of the Trials, 2 Gideon Ally of Zendikar, 1 Archangel Avacyn, 1 Walking Ballista, of all things. And then just some white control cards like Path to Exile, Cast Out, Wrath of God, Day of Judgment, Cleanse. That's a split right there, by the way. When you just have 2 Wrath of Gods, 1 Cleansing Nova, 1 Day of Judgment, only 1 Proclamation of Rebirth, though.
Yeah, but he's not heavy on the proc. I mean, I think people just don't Proclamation of Rebirth that much anymore. But if you get it, well, I think I would want to sideboard more. There are like decks that can't beat that card. So I think that like maybe I would want a little more action there, but
isn't the main thing the fact that he's got 2 Ameria the Sky Ruin? That's the primary Proclamation of Rebirth?
Yeah, but I mean like it depends what you're playing against, right? Like decks that lose to Proclamation of Rebirth often have some kind of card that can interact with an Ameria the Sky Ruin. But can't just like a blue-white deck that you actually can apply some pressure to has very little interaction with the Proclamation of a Rebirth. Like their interaction is like, I have to get Teferi, and I can Teferi your permanent so that you can't proc me too many times. But like they can easily deal with an Ameria the Sky Ruin with like a Field of Ruin.
You ever notice how like mono white decks always have? It always just seems like you have so many better sideboard cards in a mono white deck than like a green white deck or a blue white deck. It's just if you're mono white, it's just nothing but Rule of Law, Stony Silence, Leyline of Sanctity, Celestial Purge. It's nothing but bangers.
Oh man. Like, all these cards beat somebody into the floor, right? Like, Spellskite and Leyline of Sanctity. There are people out there who don't want to play against that combination of cards. Rest in Peace, obviously auto win in some matchups, overrated in other matchups that you would bring it in. But what I actually really like about this is that Wrath of God, Day of Judgment, and then included in that Settle the Wreckage kind of Cleansing Nova split. It's just like there's not much difference between Wrath of God and Day of Judgment functionally, but you just get somebody who's meddling maging you, right?
Oh, yeah, and they're the people you need Wrath of God against the most.
Yeah, exactly.
Or Day of Judgment, or whatever.
This Modern is whack if a deck that can never beat a Thoughtseize can crush a regionals. That's the thing. Like, this deck is so bad against black cards. And
wait, what? You're saying this mono white deck could never beat a Thoughtseize?
I don't think so.
First of all, 2 Leona Sanctities in the sideboard, so never say never.
Sure.
But second of all, dude, sometimes you just play to the board. You just attack with some white creatures. Squadron Hawk is great against Thoughtseize.
Well, I guess it's...
And Ranger of Eos. You can just grind them out.
Well, I think that the decks that have Thoughtseize often are superior grinding decks to this, and they have a lot of removal.
I just challenged the whole never beating him.
All right.
Dude, what about
never might be an overstatement. But clearly one thing you and I can agree on right now is that Mono Red is going to have a tough time in this room. Mono White, Dredge, these are. I mean, I saw a Boggles deck somewhere in these top 8s. Wow, yikes!
What about the Merfolk deck, man? Matt Gibbons' 8th place Merfolk deck. Obviously using Bethnic Biomancer as new addition, but I love that the Merfolk have just gotten to a spot where, of course, the Regery is just not even in the list. You're just too strong for the Regery.
Yeah, well,
4 deprives though. 4 deprives. It's kind of interesting.
Well, you want to return a perm. I mean, look, a minute ago you were saying how great you thought Counterspell was going to be. Deprive is basically Counterspell.
Yeah, but I don't know about the land.
Well, when you're an Aether Vial guy, it probably matters to you a little bit less.
Yeah. Sure, I guess. I mean, I don't know. Yeah. I suspect that we'll use Counterspell if they print Counterspell. But for now, I think Deprive definitely sweet.
Were you just trying to list in another deck that the Mono Red deck can't beat? Because this one is also atrocious for Mono Red. So bad. Master of the Pearl tried it into Master of Waves. Whew.
Man, okay, fine. Mark Blanchard's burn deck. If you just want to talk about burn, let's look at the successful burn deck in Dallas. Yep, it's just like all the other burn decks. No new cards.
I don't think that that's fair at all. Number one, I think it is demonstrably different in a couple of different ways. First of all, it only has 19 lands, which has not been picked up everywhere yet. And then separately, this deck has no light up the stage, right? I think that's really super weird.
That is super weird.
It's creature, it's light up creatures, no Grim Lavamancers anywhere. But he has 4 Skewer the Critics. I mean,
that's
someone
fair.
who is not in love with the nuances of burn, I can see how this would seem very similar to other burn decks. But I don't know, 2 Skullcrack, 3 Lightning Helix is not singing to me. I actually don't understand not playing light up the stage at all. But he's got Cindervines and Destructive Revelry as a 2+2 package in the sideboard. I think that if I were going to play Cindervines, I would go Ancient Grudge these days. Per what you were talking about before. Cindervines gives you most of the action you want Destructive Revelry for, and you just get more power out of Ancient Grudge than just playing Destructive Revelry, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's a good time for Ancient Grudge, so if you're on board with the loss of damage.
Yeah, but Cindervines makes up for that damage. Even when you just activate it, right? It probably does more damage on average. And what you need Destructive Revelry for is it's usually not fast stuff. It's stuff that kind of sits there, like a ley line or a Form of the Dragon, something like that, versus things that are artifacts you often need to kill under pressure, like an Arcbound Ravager or an Inkmoth Nexus.
In terms of hybridizing decks, there's another deck that I think we'd be remiss to skip. Andrew Bailey's Death Shadow deck was a little bit different than we've been seeing. So he top 8 Columbus with a take on Death Shadow that at first you're like, okay, the weird part, I guess, is 4 Teamer Battle Rage, 3 become Immense. That's a little unusual, right?
Well, that's very unusual, I think.
Right, and then you're like, okay, 4 Mutagenic Growth. That's a little different. But then you're like, there are 4 Wild Nacatls. What? 4 Monastery Swift Spear. What? This Death Shadow deck has 4 Monastery Swift Spears and 4 Wild Nacatls.
I think this is like a time warp deck, right? Like people were playing Death Shadow before the age of Raptor and Jerry and Sam Black. This is like a lot like the Death Shadow decks from like 2-3 years ago. When it was this is like really a zoo deck, right?
Kind of. I mean, it has 4 Monastery Swift Spears and 4 Wild Nacatls and 3 Tarmogoyfs. It's even got 2 Lightning Bolts, which is kind of zooey, I guess. I don't know.
I think if you're going to go down to 2 Lightning Bolts, but you're willing to play cards like Dismember, I think you might as well just play the tribal one that only does 2. What do you think about that?
Well, I think Dismember, you get to pay life.
No, I'm just saying the Lightning Bolts, right? The tribal one is better.
Tribal Flames?
No, the one costs R, and then it's also a goblin.
Oh. Well, it depends on how many other people you think are going to be wild and coddling.
Fair enough. And also,
it's really hard to just tar fire people when your deck only has 3 Tarmogoyfs in it. What are you doing?
I think it's really hard to play 2 Lightning Bolts. Period.
Yeah,
hard stop. That's the end of my sentence.
So I do think it's cute, the whole Faith Shield in the sideboard.
You got to have another color.
Fateful Hour. If you have 5 or less life, you and each permanent you control has protection from the color of your choice. And hint, that color is red. That color is red.
Is it better or worse in a deck like this that's planning to attack anyway to play Faith Shield versus just playing like Burrington Forge Tender? What do you think about the Forge Tender, Patrick?
Well, if you're only going to name red, I guess the Forge Tender is better. But Faith Shield, I think, can be pretty dope for also naming black.
I mean, if you have Faithful Hour.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, you can also just counter a removal spell. Right, like target permanent you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. So like when they go to Assassin's Trophy or whatever, you're a threat, you can just protect it, even if you don't have Faithful Hour.
All right, I buy it.
And then, of course, the claim to fame is actually pretty sweet for just getting back Death Shadows or Tarmogoyfs or Wild Nacatls or whatever and then just slamming into them.
I think in particular it's got to be Death Shadow.
That's the best, I mean,
Become Immense. Nice comeback on Become Immense.
Oh, yeah. Going big. So we alluded to it earlier, but I guess we might as well talk about Allison Coleman's Dredge deck. Just because of how influential Dredge is. And this take on Dredge, this is a nice, well-tuned version that isn't exactly – I think it's a good example of the archetype. It's the 4 Blood Ghast, 4 Narcomoeba, 4 Prized Amalgam, 4 Stinkweed Imp, 2 Golgari Thug. And the big payoffs outside of just, recursion with all these free bodies is you also can set up a Conflagrate kill, which is aided by each of the crippling chills as you pass by. Yeah,
I think that's how a huge number of the games end, right? Because the Conflagrate's easy to find because you're like dredging all these cards into the graveyard. So it's just in the graveyard, you can play it as a flashback. And oftentimes you're not doing very much with your hand, right? So, might be playing a land or something, but a lot of the action that you're doing is like Shriekhorning or just dredging cards up, or you're getting a free Narcomoeba. So you could have like a bunch of stuff that you can discard. So I think it's not atypical for you to just like do 6 or 9 damage with crippling chills, then get like 1 or 2 good attacks in with prize amalgams. You're pretty big. They're like 3/3, and then or get some haste in with Blood Gas. That can happen also, and then just get like pretty decent mid-sized Conflagrate.
What do you think about how much these Dredge decks have all collapsed into the same list? Like Devin Caldwell and Aiden Breer. Both top forward Baltimore with an identical mix of non-lane cards for the main deck.
Well, there's just such direct incentives to them. Like back in the day when Dredge was like a new mechanic, like back in the Frigorid days, like Life from the Loam was legal, but people didn't play a lot of it. But now when you have cards like Conflagrate, like Life from the Loam becomes very, very valuable. And plus, like just because they cut cards like Golgari Drave Troll, right there, that card doesn't exist anymore. So it lowers the bar on the power level of a dredger that you would play. So, in a way, they're narrowing which cards are good enough.
Sure. I think it's interesting from a trying to fight back perspective when they're playing so tight of a list where they're on such a script. It just seems like they're going to be more vulnerable to people hating them out.
So what do you think is good for hating these guys out? Let's just say, for sake of argument, you had a deck that could get some good offense, had some tempo to it. Maybe has a pretty decent turn 4 or turn 5 Goldfish, and was packing 4 Relic of Progenitus and 4 Nile Spellbomb. Is that enough to disrupt Dredge?
Yeah, but why are you playing 4 Relic of Progenitus and 4 Nile Spellbomb?
I'm just saying, you want to beat Dredge for sake of argument. Is that
if you want to just beat? Yeah, I think so. Why not?
I'm not sure.
If you're putting pressure on them, and you have interaction, and you don't have dead cards, and you have 8 pieces of graveyard hate, that sounds really strong. I don't know where you're getting that kind of room, but if you can literally just play 8 graveyard hate cards in a deck with a fast clock and meaningful interaction early on, so that their leftovers don't get you, I think you will mess them up.
All right, sounds great.
Is that your plan for this weekend? Is just
burn with 8 1-mana cantrips? We're going real deep.
All right, dude. Well, if that's your plan, that's your plan. I think that you'll be I think if you just have a fast, I think that the more you play with cards like for instance, it's not like Lava Spike is an inherently good plan against them because they just get free value from certain things they're doing.
Yeah.
But if you were just playing Zoo, for instance, and for some reason you just didn't need Tarmogoyf and you were just playing with 4 Relic of Progenitus and 4 Nile Spellbomb, or if you were just playing a curve deck that just had any kind of cards that cost 1, 2, and 3, and you just had some normal interaction cards, and then you just had 8 of that kind of graveyard hate, I think you would be very effective against them.
Yeah, sounds cool. Okay, if you have cards like Light Up the Stage and Bomac Courier to rebuild your hand. Okay,
dude. You're out of control. All right, have a good one, man. See you next week.
All right, bye.
Good luck in your side of it. Bye.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play Dredge, it's a jailer hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Yukora trapped in amber stasis state. Lost a lot of friends, got left behind. Had to find a way not to lose my mind. Trapped in a vault with nothing